Alright, so here we have the latest motor from BrotherHobby. This one's the Speed Shield 2207.5 and various KVs. So I want to thank BrotherHobby for sending these motors for testing. So they've always been pretty good about sending all the latest releases for me to test and share the results with you guys. So thank you, BrotherHobby. Hope to continue testing your motors. A lot of KVs on these motors. I imagine these are all production units since these are already out. So we'll go through the different KVs. 1750 kV on the low end, then 2150 kV, then 2400 kV. Then this one, it doesn't have the same type of box, so I don't know if this is a prototype. BrotherHobby didn't mention much about this to me. So this one's 2544, then 2700, 2800, and that's not the last one. The last one is 3400. Once again, BrotherHobby always trying to get all kinds of different options for us to try. So that's one good thing about BrotherHobby. You know, they're always trying new stuff. On this case, very high KV and just a little bit of an odd size on the height of the stator, just adding 0.5 millimeters to the height of a 2207 motor. So that's a 2207.5. Okay, so we'll crack open this box. They're all going to be the same motors, basically the same casing on the motor. So we'll try this one and we'll try this one with the odd box. That's the 2800. So yeah, as you can see, it's basically the same casing, same base. So the only thing that's going to change is the winding, of course, how many turns the motor has, and that's, as you know, that's what determines the kV value of the motor. And as you can see, they're continuing on the Marvel Universe theme. So this is Captain America Speed Shield. They pay homage to one of the icons of comics and Captain America. So we had the Avengers, we had Deadpool, and I forget what other one there is. So the usual features that we've come to expect out of motors these days. This looks like a 16 by 16 pattern, so 16 all the way around. And I believe that's a 4 by 9 by 4 bearing, so I'll have to measure that when I crack open the motor. And shaft retaining screw with good size. It's a 2 millimeter driver fits in there, so not the 1.5 millimeter, which is easy to round. So this one's easier to remove, to loosen. So that's good. And titanium shaft, of course, that's pretty much a given from BrotherHobby these days. They've been doing titanium shafts for a long time. And 7075 aluminum casing and base, and 52 magnets, arc magnets, of course. And looks like a single strand wire on the windings. Alright, so let's get some weight on this motor, and that's with 155 millimeters of wire. That's 20 gauge wire, so not that thick. And that's 32 grams. So 155, if we cut it to 50, we'll be removing about that much wire. So that's about 2.2 grams. Let's measure that. So the motor comes in at 29.7. That's actually quite good weight for a 2207.5. The extra 5, it's almost, you know, it's between a 2207 and a 2208 basically. So very good weight, I think, under 30 grams with the wires cut. So that's quite good. BrotherHobby has always made a lot of efforts in making light motors. So that's quite good. So I'll remove that shaft retaining screw. Hopefully it's not too tight. And yeah, with this size screws with the 2 millimeter driver, there's usually no need to heat it up anymore. It's when we had that small size screws, 1.5 millimeter driver, we had to apply some heat with the soldering iron, because otherwise you end up messing up the screw. So with these it's a lot easier, and you can remove it without messing up the screw, so that's good. So that comes right out, and enough Loctite there too. It's pretty tight, it's not gonna accidentally come off. And there's the brass washer. So we'll pull this apart and measure the stator and the bearing as usual. So hopefully this pulls out easily. And yeah, usually BrotherHobby, there's not a lot of problem removing the bell. They got really good tolerances, so everything fits nice and tight. It's like not overly tight and not loose at all. So that's a really good thing. Okay, so we'll have a closer look. I'll get the magnifying glass for some close-ups. So here's the close-up of the bell, and there's the fully hollow titanium shaft, nicely machined as usual. Curved magnets, as you can see there, and I can't feel a lip there on the ring, on the bell ring, but there's plenty of epoxy. So here's the stator, and as usual from BrotherHobby, as you can see, extremely nice windings. These things are basically a work of art. And there you can see the NMB bearing. This one's the L94ZZ, so that's a 4x9x4 bearing. And that's the bearing we all like, big and beefy. These are nice because they take a lot of abuse and don't go bad as quickly. So there's the base, and all the wires are nicely tucked in, very close right there. So one thing you do have to be careful, of course, is when you mount it, you have to make sure you keep an eye on the screw, you know, make sure it doesn't punch through and mess up your windings there, because they're pretty close right there. But that's one of the advantages of the naked bottom, is you can easily see how far the screw is going. So as long as you're careful, you're not gonna damage that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So let's get some measurements on the stator height. So that should be 7.5 millimeters. So let's see. So that's actually right on the money, 7.5 millimeters. And looks like 0.15 millimeter laminations on that stator. So, you know, pretty much all the latest techno features on this motor. And of course that's a 9 millimeter bearing, as I showed you, that was marked there with NMB bearing. That's one of the well-known brands that are known for good quality. It's pretty good. I think these are Japanese bearings, I believe. And here we can see the air gap. That's basically the gap between the face of the magnets and of the stator. So pretty tight, so that should make for a very responsive motor. So it's nice and tight. This one is the 2800 kV motor. So I actually thought all the motors were basically the same, just the windings, the number of turns was the difference. But actually on the 3400 kV motor, I noticed this is the only motor that has, looks like that could be multi-strand wire. As you can see, the difference on the wires they used. This one's a lot thinner, so I'm sure that's multi-strand. Yeah, I can see some bundles of wire right there, whereas this one they're using larger gauge wire, so single strand. So 3400 kV, that's gonna be interesting to see how this does on 4S and 5-inch props. I imagine that's the target setup on these, but I imagine that's gonna draw a lot of amps on the thrust stand, but in the air, of course, the amps are a lot lower than on the thrust stand, up to 35, even 40%. So perhaps it's not going to be a test on the thrust stand that is going to give you an idea of what to expect. I don't because I don't know if I'm going to be able to run that on 4S and 5-inch props. It might be beyond my thrust stand specs, but we'll see. But I would imagine on 5-inch and 4S it should be okay. I think once the props unload. I thought I'd try the 1750 first, so maybe I'll do the one of the high KVs next, 2800 or 3400. Hopefully it doesn't make my testing equipment go up in flames, so we'll see. So alright, put this back on right here, and I'll tighten the screw, and always make sure you use a thread lock when you take it apart. And I've mentioned this before, I usually use the purple one because that one doesn't act as crazy glue, you know, it's easier to remove. But you can use the blue one. The blue one is the next one in strength, I think, and it should be okay to remove. Alright, so let's put this on the thrust stand and get some numbers. Alright, so let's look at the thrust test results for the BrotherHobby Speed Shield 2207.5 1750 kV. As we saw, this measured at 1745 kV, so pretty close to the spec kV of 1750. So for this kV, 1700, 1750. I test on 6S 5-inch props, and 6 and 7-inch props I'll test on 5S and 4S. Let's look at some of the numbers here for the 5-inch props. And as you saw the note just before the thrust test on the video, I went ahead and also tested the BrotherHobby R6 1750 kV 2207 just to have a comparison between these two motors, since the stator and kV are pretty similar, and I just wanted to see what the differences are between this motor and the 2207. The other thing is also that I noticed that the thrust on this one was lower than when I first tested the R6. So then I started to think what the reason could be. So I actually ran this motor again a couple of times just to make sure everything was okay on the thrust test setup. So I kept getting the same results, and I started to think that it could have been the climate conditions. And I did remember that on the day I tested the R6, it was a particularly cold and dense day. The air felt quite dense that day, and that definitely makes a big difference. And on top of that, it was at a different location where I was before. It's at a lower elevation. I think it's 90 meters elevation over there, and right here I'm at 360 meters. So that's not a lot of elevation difference, but it added to the difference in weather conditions. So anyway, to make a better comparison, I went ahead and rigged up the R6 for testing again, and I put it on the thrust stand on that same evening, and these are the numbers I got, and that makes more sense now. As you can see, the R6 is almost the same as the speed shield, almost same numbers, but it's just slightly lower. So that's what we would expect for the speed shield to have higher numbers, because they have the same kV and it's a larger stator. But of course there are some differences between the two motors. The R6 has thicker magnets, and as you saw on the breakdown, the magnets on the speed shield are a little bit on the thin side. They looks like they went ahead and used thinner magnets than usual, perhaps to keep the weight low and also to keep the motor from using up the battery too quick. So that's the only thing I can think of. So anyway, here are the thrust tests. As you can see on the 5-inch 3-blade props, the speed shield is just slightly higher thrust, and the amps are pretty much the same. So for higher thrust, it's using a little bit more amps, a little bit more power. So it's drawing about the same amount of current from the battery. So the interesting thing to also notice here is that as we go to larger 6-inch and 7-inch props, the motors are actually more evenly matched. I'm thinking the magnets are coming into play right here. The R6 having thicker magnets. So for the larger props, the motors are actually having almost equal performance, as you can see here on this 6S 6-inch prop and 5S 7-inch prop, practically almost identical. So I think that's due to the magnet thickness, because for the most part all BrotherHobby motors are pretty much built the same. Stator and windings, they're all pretty similar. They use the same manufacturing process. So I thought that was interesting to see how the motor behaves from 5 to 6 to 7-inch. So overall the motor performed well, although the thrust is not as high as we would have expected compared to the R6, being that it has an extra 0.5 millimeter of stator height, which in reality is not that much. Extra 0.5 millimeter, if you measure it, is not that much. But anyway, it is more copper and more iron, and it should have been more magnet. But I think that's where the difference comes, is the magnet size. So the performance is almost the same as the R6, just slightly better on 5-inch props, and pretty much the same on 6 and 7-inch props. But overall, a pretty good performing motor, since it's performing about the same as the R6, which it was a very good performer, and I think a lot of people are liking that motor. Pretty good on power. So there you go, that's the thrust test results for this motor. Hope you find this data useful. I'll be testing the high kV versions next, so keep an eye out for those videos coming soon. Right, thank you for watching, and until the next one.